All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming to this working session this afternoon. I really appreciate it. It's certainly been a long day. I'm sure everybody had something to do before they came here this morning, and being in and out of breakout sessions and general sessions is sometimes tiring on a long day. But hopefully this session will hit some points for you, and you'll understand a little bit more about how to use TurningPoint in a different way, and that is just back in your office. Almost all of the time in the education arena, we're always talking about student response system and using TurningPoint in the classroom, in the lecture hall, which is really interesting because a lot of times in the corporate environment and in the government environment, we rarely talk about it in that same context. So it's kind of fun to work across our four strategic markets and get a lot of the depth and breadth of what you hear of all the different applications for using an audience response system. Sheila mentioned my background. I've been predominantly in the business consulting and marketing field for the majority of my career, which that time period was about 15 years. And if you know, one of the things you do as a marketing person or a business consultant is you go into new organizations and you gather data. And the way you gather data a lot of times is through flip charts and whiteboards and all of those kinds of things. And back in the day before we had digital cameras or smart boards or anything like that, and you would write all over the walls in this really nice conference room with all these whiteboards from floor to ceiling after your audience left, you'd sit in the room and you and your colleagues would get a sheet of paper out and furiously write everything down, right? Because you may not even have had a laptop at the time. And then you'd go back to your desk and type it all into your desktop. And because who was lucky enough to have an administrator to do all that for them, right? And then somebody got smart and they said, you know what, let's use these flip charts and whiteboards, and now we're bringing in digital cameras and we're taking pictures of the board, right? But yet we're still needing to take that data, how many people voted for idea number 1, number 2, number 3, and those kinds of things, and translate it into a document that could be used and prepared and presented back to the interested stakeholders, right? So there's this whole iteration, and then they came out with the intelligent whiteboard that could capture things directly to you. Well, there's not always one in the room that I'm using and things like that. But what we found in the corporate world and in our own offices is that we can use a tool like an audience response system in a lot of different ways to help facilitate our meetings, build consensus, make decisions, evaluate decisions. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So someone has stole my clicker, so I apologize. I'm going to have to keep walking over here and doing it this way. So basically, generate ideas and insights as they relate to practical, everyday meeting use of TurningPoint. For the sake of today's session, I'm just going to say everyday meeting as defined as a meeting that involves decision-making or a need to build a consensus. So what I don't want you to think is that what we do in our offices or what we see in corporations is that they've put away the whiteboard and they've put away the flip chart and they've put away the sticky notes, right? All of those things are still being used very effectively to build consensus, make decisions, but sometimes it's helpful to involve other technologies like WebEx conferencing or audience response or something else with those. But what we find is when we have larger groups of people, 5 or more is what I'm referring to, where we need to rapidly build consensus and document what we've done, it's very helpful to introduce into that everyday meeting a technology like an audience response system. So when we talk about everyday, I'm assuming that we're at least making a decision and we're trying to build consensus amongst the group versus just the two of us sitting there meeting. Our agenda, first we're going to do an idea generation. Why do some everyday meetings hurt? Those that we're trying to build build consensus or make a decision. Today's everyday meeting, we're actually going to have a mock meeting where we're going to decide how to spend $20,000 that someone has just given us to improve a lecture hall, right? And we're going to make that decision before we leave the session. Unfortunately, we don't have the money to spend, but we'll make the decision anyhow, right? Two simple applications that provided big value. It's kind of an interesting. I've picked two examples that are not education. I've picked two examples that are not about the lecture hall. They are about, and the student, they are about the back office and how people are making decisions to run their business and spend their money and allocate their priorities. And then just a quick wrap up on how my life could have been different, having access to technology that helps me build consensus and make decisions more effectively. All right? So, real quickly here, what I'd like to do is an idea generation. Why do meetings that focus on making decisions or building consensus sometimes hurt? But during this idea generation, in this particular meeting, what I want to do is really hear from you and then assess collectively what the number one reason is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a really quick tool that's called Slide on the Fly. And, or maybe I'm not, because they have it set up really weird here. Is there a technician in the room? Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, so apologize for my back, but if we were sitting at our conference table, I'd be joining you more. So why do some everyday meetings hurt? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to collect, well, just for the sake of today, just some rapid-fire decisions, ideas on why these types of meetings hurt, right? Decision-making or consensus building. What are the big challenges? What really, when you get in these meetings, really makes you go, oh my gosh, this is just a painful process? What's a headline somebody can share with me?
Same meeting you had last time.
Same meeting I had last time, right? What's another one? Participants unprepared. Another one. Time consuming. Another one. Personal agendas. There's none of those out there, are there? Anybody else?
The leader has already made the decision.
Oh, that's bad, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So now what I can do is I can say, insert slide. I'm not even leaving my presentation, and I immediately have a slide that we can use to ask you to poll against. So it's a very clever way for me to do a brainstorm, but now what I'm really after before you leave and go back to work is knowing what the number one thing that this group is concerned about. As a good leader, after you leave, I'm going to look at my data, and I'm going to focus my time on the biggest issues and help overcome those barriers for our success. So go ahead and vote. Pick the one that you believe is the biggest issue with your everyday decision-making, consensus-building meeting. I'm going to go ahead and close polling in a second or two here. Just by click. Oh, we have a timer, so I'll go ahead. I'm not going to wait until it gets all down to zero. I'm going to go 3, 2, 1. Polling's closed. And there we go. So the leader has already made the decision. Now, the neat thing about this is, let's say that you were my department, and we were getting ready to participate in something that involved 3 other departments. And I'm accountable to help make sure we make the right decision. Instead of me going to that meeting and representing what other people might think was just my personal agenda, I could say, you know, I did this polling in my meeting the other day, and they came up with these 5 things, but here's what they all selected anonymously, without looking right and looking left. This is about helping me increase a better decision and focusing on the biggest challenge, right? So, dangers of making bad decisions or building false consensus, right? These are some that I've come up here with. Lost time, lost budget, political decisions win over best decisions. Do those all look agreeable to you? Dangers of making bad decisions, right? So let me ask you a question. Which typically costs more if you make a bad decision, right? Is it the decision-making process? Which typically costs more, the decision-making process itself or the implementation of your decision? Just by a show of hands. I'm sorry? Implementation. Sandy up here says implementation is often the bigger cost. I saw somebody else over here. Are you agreeing? Right? Everyone's kind of nodding.